Stay tuned while we get all channels rolling and think of your questions. This time each week we do a live Q&A and just stand by while we get all the tech going. If you've got questions about bees, beekeeping, flow hives, chime in below. Look at these bees go. Thanks for joining us for this week's live Q&A. Look at these bees go. They've been out foraging already this morning. They're hard-working little bees, bringing back their load of nectar and pollen. They almost defy physics with how much weight they can carry, which is almost their entire body weight of nectar and pollen. They fly back to the hive. They'll be delivering that to another bee in terms of the nectar, who will then pack it into the cells, and if they've got their pollen baskets full, they will be looking for somewhere to deposit them to create their bee bread by pushing those pollen balls down the cells with their head, adding their enzymes, their special sauce, and making bee bread, which is the primary food for the young developing bee larvae. So thanks for joining us this morning. We've got all of the tech rolling now. You can put your questions in the comments. We'll answer them as we go. We're going to be harvesting honey right here in this hive, in this wicking boat bed. And we're also going to be having a look at a hive we looked a couple of weeks ago that we thought was queenless. So we're going to get in there and see whether they've raised a new queen or not. So stay tuned for that. We'll also be showing you our super lifter invention. But without further ado, let's harvest a bit of honey because there's a lot coming in at the moment. It's kind of like it's spring here, although it's our autumn. In the northern hemisphere, it is spring, and up in the north, it might not be quite happening yet. There's still snowstorms, I hear, up in Pennsylvania. Down in the south, it's well underway. The bees are busy already storing a lot of honey. Here in the southern hemisphere, it is a beautiful autumn day. We've had a lot of rain recently, but somehow in between the showers, the bees have been producing a lot of honey. So a good idea to get in here and harvest some. Let's choose this frame here because it looks nice and full. And we've put our little tube in the bottom like that. Put the key in, we'll give that a turn, and we'll see. That's actually quite easy to turn today. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to turn. Doing it in segments makes it easier. And we'll see if we can get another one going as well. So we'll choose another frame here, and taking the little cap out at the top. And let's have a look. Have we got honey? Yes. It's a beautiful view, actually, looking down the tube to the stalagmites of honey dripping from the ceiling. And it's a little bit hard to see with the camera, but it's so cool. And that really shows you that all of those cell lines have turned into channels, and that honey is dripping down. Here it is, just starting to come out of this tube here. And I'm going to taste the first drop just because I love honey. Oh, that is lovely. It's amazing. It's always so different frame by frame. It's one of the amazing benefits of harvesting honey with our flow hive invention. Now let's see. Oh, that's pretty easy to turn too. Look at that. Let's see if we get a different colour from this frame. Meanwhile, think of your questions, put it in the comments. We'll get to answering those. We're going to be heading down here to look at a hive we looked at a couple of weeks ago that we thought had no queen. And if the hive doesn't have a queen, they've got to get busy and make one, and if they don't do that, then the hive dies out. So it's one of the main things you're looking out for as a beekeeper, making sure your hive is queen right. And queen right is a term that we give to a hive when it's got a good laying, functioning queen. Look at that, beautiful honey. I never get sick of watching it. pour out of the hive. A completely different flavour there. Mmm, so good. Okay, so any questions coming in, Chase? Bees, beekeeping, flow hives, let us know. Also let us know what the season is like where you are in your area. It's super interesting to map it across the continents.
Yep, Seeds. Just often a question we get asked is what makes the different flavoured honeys?
Okay, the different flavoured honeys is simply which flowers the bees have been visiting while they're filling that frame of honey. And because we can harvest frame by frame easily with a flow hive, that means you get different flavours per frame quite often. If you've got a huge flowering of one individual thing, perhaps there'll be multiple frames of that same flavour. But if you have a lot of variation in forage, which most places do, you get different flavours per frame, different colours, super interesting. We've got two different flavours, but they're a similar colour today. Whoops, made a mess there.
Seeds, got a question, like the way it's flowing out, why is it sort of flowing, seems quite watery?
Because it's warm. If you warm up your honey, it will become more liquid. When it cools, it should be the consistency of honey. If you find it's still liquid, perhaps you've harvested a bit early and the bees haven't finished reducing the moisture content yet. So if you find that, that means you'll need to consume it before fermentation may occur or keep it in the fridge. It's not a big deal if you end up with honey that's a bit too runny, but it just means it won't keep forever on the shelf. Whereas if the moisture content is down around that 18% range, then with a good lid on it, it'll keep for 3,000 years potentially.
Seeds, for people who are preparing for spring, what preparation should they be doing?
So preparing for spring in the Northern Hemisphere means getting your equipment ready. That's when the bees boom the most, that's when bees are available, that's when the swarms to catch, that's when you can take splits from your hive or you can take splits from a friend. And so that's a great time to get your equipment ready, get it ready early so you can really take advantage of the bees and the way they naturally expand in the springtime. So that means ordering your equipment, putting your boxes together, putting your favourite coat on it on the outside, and you don't necessarily have to build it all at once. You could just focus on building the brood box base and roof so that you've got another box to take a split. So that's a really good thing to do in the springtime, is be prepared for your apiary to grow or to start beekeeping. And that's a great time to start beekeeping. In many places you can start beekeeping at other times of the year as well, but the spring is an amazing time because the abundance of bees really building up in response to a lot of flowers. So when you've got a lot of flowers, you've got a lot of bees responding to that, the queens are laying more eggs, the population is expanding, and oftentimes they're expanding beyond their box, and that's when you can take splits and start another hive.
Our happy hounds and islanders tuning in, as they tune in every week, and just wondering, it was warm and now it's got cold and wet there, and the question is wondering, they've got two flow hives about 8 feet apart from each other. Is there any chance that you think they could start robbing each other?
So you can keep flow hives very close together. In fact, you see this row down here, we've got a lot of hives close together, and in fact commercial beekeepers will keep them wall to wall on pallets. So there's no issue with keeping them close together. Robbing is actually caused when the bees get a taste for stealing honey instead of collecting flower nectar. So as a beekeeper, you just want to avoid things like accidentally leaving a frame out covered in honey, because the bees will find that they'll decide that collecting honey rather than going and collecting nectar and turning it into honey is easier, and then they might decide, as you say, to rob the other colony. The other time that might be useful, if you've got hives close together, if you've got one really weak one, reducing the size of the entrance will reduce the likelihood of rubber bees getting in there and stealing the honey and decimating that colony. So yes, but not usually. Usually your hives are fine close together, And you only get problems as a secondary problem if that in robbing, which is like when the hive is really weak and dying out anyway, or there's been honey left out.
Seeds, whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, what is the best time to start beekeeping?
So spring is the biggest boom for bees all around the world. So spring is a great time, but it's not to say that you can't start other times. So here, where we are in this subtropical region, we can split hives almost any time of year, and it's simply just watching the flowers and watching how the bees are responding. And if they're really building up, we can then take a split. But that's quite different to other parts of the world where you've got long cold winters where you wouldn't be starting in the long cold winter. Also depends what method you are going for to start your beekeeping. So if you are starting with a package or a nuke, which is just a small little hive, and building up from there, starting earlier in the season will give you more time and more chance of getting a good honey harvest like this. Where if you decide to start by purchasing a existing beehive that's already got bees, then you can do that almost any time of year. Obviously you probably wouldn't be doing it when it's snowing, but you know, if you have that kind of long cold winter in your area. But other times of year you could go and pick up that beehive and move it to your location. And then you can get a nice warm sunny day, get in your bee suit, and you can transfer the bees from the conventional Langstroth hive into your flow hive, so you get all of these great features that come with our flow hive.
Fantastic, Seed. Now, how do bees make honey?
So bees make honey by beating their little tiny wings at 240 times a second, flying roughly 40 kilometres an hour, foraging usually within a 2 mile, 3 kilometre radius, or they might go 6 miles, 10 kilometres, and then they're bringing all of that nectar back into the hive. The bee then passes the nectar load to another bee, a receiver bee, who takes that droplet of nectar and goes and finds somewhere to put it. Now it'll often be in an empty cell where they're splashing the nectar around the walls, and that way they can start the process of fanning it, dehydrating. And as they move honey around, they take the moisture out with their bodies, and they also use evaporative techniques to evaporate that moisture. And what they're trying to do is thicken it up from very light nectar, which is very watery, down to a thick honey. And in doing so, they also impart a lot of enzymes. They're also concentrating the properties of the honey, and if it's got medicinal properties, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, all of the good things that are in honey, then that gets concentrated into this beautiful liquid. Now they're storing it because they want to have some food available at times when there's no flowers. So it's their storage. Now, lucky for us, these European honeybees, Apis mellifera, which is the honeybee we all know and humans have taken all around the world, are so good at collecting nectar and producing honey that we can often share in their gold. And look at this. This is just beautiful, watching it pour out of the hive here. Each frame will fill a jar like this, and it'll be different flavours and different colours usually per frame. It's an extraordinary thing.
So Vane's asking, if you've got a hive, will the bees attack visitors that come and visit your house?
So that really depends on genetics. Now some hives are more territorial. In fact, this one is a little bit. You notice I put my veil on, and I was mucking around at the entrance before. I just put that entrance reducer on, and that alarmed them a little bit, got them in a mood where they wanted to protect their hive, and that means there's the odd bee coming to buzz me. However, if I did that on some other hives there, you'd find they wouldn't say boo, because they have genetics that aren't so territorial or aggressive, if you like. So if you are keeping bees in close proximity to your house, or you notice the house is just right here, then it's a nice idea to get your bees from a breeder, and when you do that, they'll be breeding for nice, gentle bees. And that way, you'll be able to be in closer proximity to it without being so concerned. Now, another thing, when you situate your hive, point the flight path. You notice the bees are flying in and out the entrance and flying that way, and then they go up and away. So you want to make sure you're pointing that entrance to where people aren't usually walking by. Bees are great because they don't take up very much space. In fact, this is only how much space you need, and people then will put their hive right on their balcony in a high riser, or they'll put it on in a small backyard, or they'll put it on a veranda, or they'll put it on a rooftop. So it's very versatile like that, because you don't need land anymore because the bees are flying out to where the flowers are. You can utilise very small spaces for keeping beehives and get a real amount of produce, which is just such a rewarding thing. And with our flow hive, you don't need the extracting room anymore, which is a game changer for people, because instead of dedicating a whole room in your house or dedicating the laundry or the garage to honey extraction in the conventional way, which needs big centrifuges, decapping benches, hot knives, buckets, sieves, you name it, all of that stuff, no longer need. You have it all built into the hive right here. You turn the key and your jar fills up with honey like this. So it also means you're not pulling the hive apart so much, which might be an advantage if it's on a balcony on a high riser where you've got people in close proximities. You can then choose your brood inspections strategically at a really good time, rather than having to make sure you're doing the honey harvests at those perfect moments as well. In fact, you can harvest honey at night, you can harvest honey in the rain, all these things you can't do conventionally. So the flow hive is a game changer for people in their backyards, balconies, or even on rooftops in the city.
So it's, Pure Coastal Honey's wondering, have you found a difference in your small hive beetle population in this hive that's in the boat under the shade compared to the ones down there in the full sun?
Yes, we absolutely have. And the reason why we got this hive in the shade is so that I don't get sunburnt standing out there for an hour on this sunny day. But it's not as good for the hive because, as you say, we get a lot more hive beetles in this hive. And you also are more likely to have things like chalk brood build up, which is a fungus that can get into the brood. Ideally, your bees get a good whack of sunshine, at least for the first half of the day, and that way it'll help dry things out. You get less beetles and less chalk brood.
Right, now Paul's wondering, Cedar, is pollen bound as much of a problem as nectar bound?
Interesting. Sometimes of year we see that too. So you get into your brood nest, you're doing your inspection, you see all of the frames are full of pollen because they've been collecting so much and making so much bee bread. Then, as you say, it's pollen bound and there's nowhere for the queen to lay. So as a beekeeper, you can make decisions on behalf of the bees if you want and pull some of those pollen frames, open up the brood nest in springtime, allowing more space for the queen to lay eggs, which will limit the chances of your hive swarming, because there needs to be lots of good cells down here in the brood box for the queen to lay her eggs. Now there's multiple ways to fix that congestion issue or help the bees or limit them from swarming, which is their natural build up and divide. Now you can do that by adding another box, you can do that by taking a split, or you can do that by taking some of the pollen and or honey away from the brood nest, opening it up and adding some blank ones in for the bees to draw their comb and the queen to then have lots of new area to lay her eggs. So spring management, you might choose, if you see a hive that's wall to wall with pollen, nowhere to lay eggs, to take some of that away. Great question.
Yeah, got a lot of people, and Mark from Fiji is one of them, and quite a lot of other people asking about us. Do we ship internationally? Do we ship to their country? Look, the best thing is really honeyflow.com is our website, and that'll direct you to whether you're in the UK or Australia or wherever you are. And if you can't find the information you need, just contact customer support. You can email, call us, chat to us. Just be aware we are in Australia, so different time zone. But yeah, we can try and ship to you everywhere around the world.
So we have strategically set up warehouses in the major continents around the world, so it's quick shipping for you. So if you order in the USA, for instance, it'll come out of our USA warehouse. If you order in Canada, it'll come out of our Canada warehouse. If you order in Europe, it'll come out of the Netherlands, and so on. So we want to make sure we can get your hives to you quickly, so it'll be coming from your region to you. If you're in one of the more far out places in the world, it doesn't mean we can't ship to you. You just may need to get in contact to make sure we can get that hive through to your region. But all major regions, it'll ship quickly to you.
Great, thanks, Cedar. And now question, will this hive withstand heavy rain without the timber rotting?
So this is our TGP actually, which is a new wood. We have recently we've put effort into creating, if you like, a wood type that can withstand the elements a bit like Western Red Cedar can. Now Western Red Cedar is by far the longest lasting beehive wood we have in the world, and it's lightweight also. So that's a very popular wood type in North America. Now what we've been doing over many years is trying to compete with that, trying to get another wood type that has the properties of long-lasting outdoors. And where we've come to is this TGP wood, which is thermograde paulownia. So we've gone through a process of heating the wood in a special way that actually changes the chemical structure of the wood. It changes its colour, it makes it slightly lighter, and we worked hard to also make it so it wasn't brittle. And what we have is another robust wood type on offer. So this it's also a beautiful wood. Now we do recommend using a good outdoor house paint on the TGP. However, this hive has been here for now 18 months with the decking coat on it, and it is going very well. So we can stay tuned for that, but at the moment we're still recommending outdoor house paint on our TGP. And that is an important thing in beekeeping. You want to choose equipment that is long lasting. So we're putting lots of effort into that. If you want the ant's pants or the bee's knees, then go for the Western Red Cedar, which is proven over many decades to last a long time. I'm not saying your hive will, but we do have beekeepers saying they have got Western Red Cedar boxes that they've had for 50 years, which is incredible considering there's no chemical treatment on it. So what we're doing here with the TGP is trying to achieve that without chemical treatment.
So how do you know when it's ready, when you're ready to harvest your honey?
So when the honey is ready to harvest is when the bees have put their wax capping over the top. So if you look in this window here, this is a beautiful example of partially capped cells. So you'll notice you can see the hexagon cells and the nectar glinting. Give us a thumbs up if you can see that, where you've got open cells in this region. And over here, it looks a little bit of a white, creamy wax colour beneath their feet. And up here, you've got the in-between where they're closing their wax capping in. So what they do is they get the moisture content low enough and they keep packing those cells, and eventually they wax over the top. It's like the lid on a preserving jar saying that moisture content is good enough for the honey to keep for a long time in storage, so we're going to cap that off. So that's when it's ready for you to harvest as well, because you want it to keep for a long time in your jar on the shelf. It's not to say you can't harvest earlier if you want to, but you'll get more liquid honey that may be prone to fermentation. So when you see the wax capping going on the cells, and if you look here, you can see that this frame, for instance, all of the cells are full of honey, and if you look down between them, you can even see the wax capping. So using this end frame view and their side windows and watching it over time so you can see whether the bees are adding honey or taking it away will give you a good idea of when to harvest and a good idea of when to leave it for the bees as well. So these windows are a great advantage in beekeeping, and very cool that you can even watch the bees deposit their nectar with this cross-section view of the cells and watch them building it. And this window view will change over the course of a day as they bring in nectar, dry it out, reduce it, and so on. Short answer is wait till it's capped before harvesting your honey. That way your moisture content will be nice and low.
Just Call Me Tea has just bought 2 flow hives, so thanks for that. And the question is, just wondering, do you have to clean the flow frames? And I think maybe they're looking at these end ones, just wondering, is that dark look normal, or will they be needing to maintain and clean their flow frames?
Okay, so you'll notice here that looks like we've got a little bit of a mixture of different flow frames in here, where this one you can clearly see through it, and you can see that they've got honey in these cells and not in that one. If you come across to the one we're harvesting, this actually has been in beehives for many seasons. And the reason why I can tell that is there's a lot of wax build up and propolis build up on those cell walls. And that's a good thing, because that means your honey is stored inside a wax pocket inside every single cell. But as those wax layers build up, you lose that beautiful view there. So what people do after about 5 years or so of keeping the flow frames in their hive is they take the frames out and they use a pressure washer to blast down the cell lines, clean a bunch of that wax off. When you do that, make sure you support your frame, because you don't want it to fall apart when you're doing that. Support it on a paved surface or leaning against a wall. Set it to open position and blast down the cell lines. And if you pay special attention to the window end, you can get it reasonably clean again to get a nice view back. If you connect your pressure washer to a hot water service, it'll work even better.
Cedar, does moving the 2 sections, and I think they're meaning of the flow frames, ever damage the bees or larvae?
So we've put a lot of careful thought and even a whole patent into that specific topic. Now, addressing the second part of the question first, will it damage the larvae? The answer is no, because you've got a queen excluder here. The queen can't get up and lay eggs in your flow frame area. Now, if you do find she got up there, then you simply need to put her back down in the bottom below the queen excluder. Or if you can't find her, you're brushing all the bees down to make sure she's down where she should be, laying her eggs down in the brood nest, not in your flow frames. First part of the question, if bees are down the cells, will they be damaged? Now, we put a lot of effort into that. Some of our earlier prototypes over a decade of inventing had parts that met together like this. So there were cells that split, came apart and came back together. And because they met fully in the moving parts, what that meant is it was no problem if bees were down the cells when you're harvesting, it goes like that, and they could still wiggle out, but also some bees could wiggle in. And it was when the cells came back together we noticed that it could catch a wing or a leg of the bee. So what we did was put a V-shaped gap between the moving parts, meaning the bees have to build this bridge between all of the parts with their wax. So that way, when you open, this little wax bridge breaks. When you close, there's a gap here, so you're not catching the bee's knees, if you like. And that was an important part of inventing, because our goal was to make it as gentle as possible for the bees and as easy as possible for us. And we succeeded in that, and I can confidently say that we harm a lot less bees harvesting this way than I did conventionally, which if you know the conventional method, you're often pulling lots of frames out, squashing lots of bees, rolling lots of bees, using leaf blowers and all of that to get all the bees off, and taking all those frames to the processing shed. It's pretty hard to do without harming lots of bees. So this is by far a more gentle way, in my opinion. And you can see the bees through the window, and you can see they haven't even noticed that all of this honey is streaming out of the back of the hive. They're just standing there on the comb surface or doing their job and remaining calm.
So it's got someone who's just setting up their flow hive and just wondering, is it okay to set it up with 2 deep boxes and then the flow hive on top?
So 2 deep boxes and a flow hive on top, that is a common setup for people in really cold areas. Now, the issue that comes with that if you start with that exact setup is perhaps there's a bit too much space for too long, and you may not see results in your flow hive for a very long time. So what people often do is they will start in this configuration, and as they've started to fill the honey and as they've started to naturalise the flow frames, then they add the second brood box, if you like. And that way, the bees have already made a start and already started to fill the frames with honey. So it depends on what time of year and what you're trying to achieve. But in the springtime, that popular method is you start in this configuration. Then if you do want another second brood box, add it after the bees have already made a start on this one. And that will increase the honey stores you get in the flow frames that season, or it'll happen quicker. Now, there's a whole lot of different strategies, so ask some local beekeepers, get some local knowledge, but if you were towards the end of your season, for instance, you might decide that just adding another brood box and leaving those honey stores as a store for winter was the important goal. So earlier on in the season, your goal might be to get a booming hive and fill a whole lot of flow frames of honey and be able to harvest like this. At other times of year, if it was coming into your fall and there was a long winter ahead, your goal is thinking about how much stores the bees need to get through a long winter, and you might decide to just let the bees fill an ideal size box of honey to get through the winter. Fred Dunn in Pennsylvania, that's his favourite method, is to run the flow hive with a brood box and an ideal, which he'll leave for the bees for the winter, and the flow hive on top of that. Get some local knowledge, depends on your season. We like to keep it like this all year round, and that's because we're in a subtropical region and that works well for us here. But it is common to have a second brood box, or perhaps an ideal as a second brood box in those colder regions.
So how long does it take to get a frame full of honey?
Great question. So like many things in beekeeping, the answer varies a lot, but it gets very exciting in the springtime when you've got a booming colony, a lot of flowers dripping to the ground with nectar. Your bees race out, and up in Canada they boast they can fill a whole box in a single day. So all of these frames full in a single day. That's hard to believe. The fastest we ever see it here is all of these frames filled in a week. You harvest them all and they fill up again in a week. And that's very exciting when that's happening. However, to set your expectations, you've got the other end of the extreme where sometimes the colony's not strong enough to store a lot of excess for you to share honey to. Or sometimes the season just doesn't have enough flowers. The rains didn't come, perhaps there was fire or drought, and all of these things affect the flowering species. So in the middle is what we say in our area is we could harvest all of these frames a couple of times a year. Now this particular hive, we've harvested a lot more than that, but we might find other hives we haven't. So on average, we say we bank on harvesting all of these frames a couple of times a year, which would be 14 of these jars, so 3 kilograms of honey per jar. 14 of those per season.
Sorry.
Just amazing, don't you think?
So amazing. Look at it.
Look at that honey.
Oh,
hey,
look at that little bee having
the
a little
bee's
drink.
coming to have a lick.
So you know you've built your beautiful flow hive and it's looking fabulous in your garden. Now will the bees just turn up and make a home, or do you have to get bees?
Okay, it's unlikely that they'll turn up and make a home. The most reliable way to get started, and the way most people start, is they buy some bees off a bee breeder or take a split from a friend. So you get a little mini hive, if you like, with 4 or 5 of the frames out of the bottom here in a little box with a queen already laying, with honey stores, pollen stores, everything a little hive needs. You put that in your garden, you wait till a warm sunny day, which could be in a week, could be in a month, and then you swap those frames into your brood box. Look after them and they'll grow from there. Now, you can also start with other methods. So you can catch a swarm, you can order a package of bees, which is just bees and a queen in the mail, shake them into your hive, they can start from that. Or what you're alluding to is called a bait hive, where you set up the brood box and hope that the bees move in. Now that really only works when you're close to other hives. So because we've got lots of hives here, we set up bait hives. In fact, this one in the tree right there. So you see there's a hive up in the tree, 6 or 12 feet off the ground, and that's exactly for that reason. If there's a swarm around, perhaps it'll think that is a great home, and I'll move right in. If you add a bit of lemongrass oil, or there's a product called Swarm Commander, you'll increase the chances of bees moving in because it mimics one of the bee's pheromones. So that can be a fun thing to do. Only really works when you've got a lot of hives around and it's springtime. Otherwise, order bees from a bee breeder or take a split from a friend.
Now, Seeds, we've got a few people saying you'd mentioned the hive inspection with the super lifter, and just wondering if you'll still get around to that.
Let's go and do that.
Let's go do it.
A good prompt there. Now, if we're going to walk away, it's sensible just to cover up the honey. We'll still get a little bit more. Hopefully we won't overflow this jar, but it looks like we're getting some perfect honey harvest today. We've got 2 slightly different colours. This one's darker, this one's lighter, and 2 flavours to match. It's a beautiful thing. Now I'm using these wax wraps so I don't have to throw any plastic kitchen wrap away, and beeswax just seems like the right thing to use. And covering it up like that, these are the kind of ones you wrap your kids' sandwiches in if you don't want to use plastic wrap. You can use netting, you could use whatever, but the idea is if you are going to walk away, cover up your jars so the bees don't end up stuck in the honey. Sometimes they're a little bit hungry and they think that that's a shortcut, getting the honey from around the back instead of going all the way out to the flowers. Okay, now have I got everything I need? I'll grab my hive tool, grab my bee brush, my little magnetic tool clip here, which is a handy little trinket to put your hive tool on, and away we go. Now, it was this hive on the end we needed to look at because a couple of weeks ago we found that it looked like it didn't have a queen, and we want to make sure it has a queen or this hive will die out or get overtaken by the beetles and things like that. Without a queen, the colony is counting its days. So, first of all, we better check. I did light a smoker this morning. Let's see if it is still going. Beautiful. It's going well. Smoking my hands to mask my own mammal pheromone, giving the bees a good little smoke in the entrance like that, and topping up our smoker because we want to make sure it's still going as we do our brood inspection. Now, wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping. Don't burn yourself or use your hive tool to pack it. Don't do what I do. And there we go. Smoke is going, nice cool smoke, perfect for it. And now we're going to show you how to lift the brood box off the easy way. So this is our super lifter invention, but before we get started I'm going to put my bee suit on. So we're doing up the 3 zips, making sure they're all the way done up because we don't want little gaps for bees to get in while we're doing our brood inspection. Making sure the Velcro is pressed down in the middle. This is our super lifter. Comes in a nice bag if you order the bag. Then you've got your handles here to pick up like this. Hands go apart. It should automatically set itself up into this shape. You're rolling your wrists in. You are connecting. Step 2 is written on the lower brackets there. So we're connecting on to those lower load point screws, which is the only modification you need to make to your hive or even a conventional Langstroth hive. Step 3, step 4 is written here. We're lifting that, and what's going to happen is this is already doing all of that work for you where you normally had to chisel that box and muscle it off. So now you don't need to do that anymore, and we are ready to roll the hive over and start our beekeeping. So all I need to do is jump up there, and if I grab the handle on this side, then away we go. And now we're beekeeping without all of that work, chiseling, muscling the heavy box of honey off the hive that it once was. So that's the easy way to do your brood inspections. Now here is a queen excluder. We're going to take that off, and whenever we take that off, we're looking on the underside to see if there might be a queen there, because we don't want to orphan her from the hive. I can't see a queen there, but we are hoping we find a queen in the brood nest. Now the next thing we're going to do is add our little frame rests, which are another little useful trinket if you haven't seen those that we've come out with recently, that work very nicely with the super lifter. And you can use your shelf brackets that you harvest with, but these are purpose built for the job of using the super lifter and a nice frame rest. There we go. So keep those questions coming in. We're going to look in here today. I can already see that this side of the hive doesn't have many bees at all. So the brood nest is likely centered over that side. But because there's no bees over here, that'll be an easy frame to pull out. So we can start then going sideways. The first one's always hard. You always look for a frame that's going to come out more easily to get started. Now all we've got there is some honey, some drone cells, some worker cells. Not much going on that frame.
Hey, so he's just wondering, because Peter's just asking about that might be a good frame to do it on. Could you expand why you don't use wax foundation or plastic, and why you prefer the bees to build on their comb themselves?
So I preferred to let the bees do it, and what I've noticed here actually, as I said, there wasn't much going on, but we actually have a capped queen cell with a queen inside it. Look at that. Very cool. So I like to go foundationless, one, because it's easier, and two, because you can let the bees do it all perfectly naturally, and I believe there's health benefits with that. And all we do is provide the wooden frame. Now, conventional beekeeping, you need to have either a plastic foundation or wires running through, because otherwise when you put that in a centrifuge to spin the honey out, it'll blow apart. We don't need that reinforcement anymore, therefore we can let the bees do it perfectly naturally down here in the brood box, simply by providing the wooden frame and the comb guide, and they do a great job. Might not be quite as straight as if you had a plastic foundation in there, but to me that doesn't matter, and you get this beautiful thing of the bees just doing it all themselves, and you don't need to spend your nights waxing, wiring frames, or buying foundation, or introducing wax from other hives. So there's multiple reasons why I prefer it, but you can do whatever you like. You can put plastic foundation or wax foundation in your brood nest if you want to, and many conventional beekeepers will be doing that because they need to if they're ever going to put those frames in a centrifuge. Okay, now let's get our smoker going. Notice this hive was a little bit toey. They were just giving me a little warning on my hand. As a beekeeper, you get used to the mood of the hive and respond accordingly. You might put your gloves on if you notice they look like they are starting to want to sting your hands. If you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves from the start until you really have a good feel for when it's the mood of the hive, and therefore you can manage whether you want to wear gloves or not. But in the beginning, wear your gloves. Okay, so we're going to pull out another few frames. I put that frame on the ground because there wasn't much going on, but in actual fact there was a queen cell, so let's say that's a keeper. It's quite interesting to see a queen cell. It means the bees successfully are raising a queen. The chances are they raise more than one, so we might find in here that they have already got a laying queen. So to do that, we need to probably get over this side of the brood nest, looking at how the bees have arranged their nest here, pull out a frame and see whether we have any brood. Okay. Beautiful, look at that, that is unreal. We've got shining white larvae and even some capped brood here. So we are underway with a laying queen. Well done hive, it fixed itself up. without our intervention.
Fantastic.
So when you've got a weak hive like this that lost their queen and they've got another one going and they're building up, it's really important if you've got that small hive beetle in your area to give them a hand by trapping some of those beetles with the oil trap below. Otherwise, they might prey on a weak hive and you might lose it even though there wasn't anything wrong. It's just they were too weak to defend against the beetles. Super important at the moment in our area and in areas where the varroa are expanding into, because the hive beetles really take advantage of the hives when they're weak, and you get a lot of hive beetles breeding up from unmanaged colonies that are dying out. So big tip for if varroa's moving into your area, manage the hive beetles. They're what seems to be finishing off the hives. The varroa is a slower build and the hive beetles are really smashing hives. So catch them in whatever way you prefer. Activate your oil tray, and that was our big learning. We're over the other side now where the build-up phase looks like it's come and gone, and now things have stabilised, which is really great to see. We have, I can't see the queen. I don't need to see the queen because I can see the shining white larvae down the cells. And if I look closely, I see bee eggs as well that look like tiny little grains of rice. Give us a thumbs up if you can see those shining white larvae down the cells. Very cool. So we could actually use that queen cell for another hive if we wanted to, because this hive doesn't need it. They often raise more than one to increase their chances of survival. Let's put that there while we pull out some more frames. Not because we need to right now, just because we want to have a look and we're curious. Keep the questions coming in.
So you mentioned that capped queen cell, and Callum's doing great shots of showing that. A few people saying, so what is a capped queen cell and how does this happen? Like, do they make the cell first, or how does it become a capped queen cell?
Okay, so the bees are pretty clever, and they can start a queen with any worker cell if they want to. So if there's eggs down the cells, what happens is in the first, say, 3 days of the young larvae, then all of those worker bees will be fed royal jelly, which is like mother's milk, if you like. The bees excrete that. Now, if they change and start feeding that developing larvae plant proteins, i.e. bee bread, that they make from the pollen, that's the genetic switch for that bee to become a worker. Otherwise, it would become a queen. Now, the signal for the bees, or the worker bees, as whether to feed plant proteins to the developing larvae or not, is the size of the cell. So if you artificially, and the bee breeders will do this, put in large size cells, say 9 millimeters or so, the bees will then think they're queen cells, and they will raise queens in there instead of raising worker bees by feeding that developing larvae the royal jelly for its entire gestation. Through epigenetics, that means it'll grow bigger legs, bigger body, everything it needs to be a laying queen. So pretty cool. So that's what you saw on this frame back here. They look like a bit of a peanut-sized cell. Sometimes they're bigger. This one's a bit of a small one, but I can tell because it's capped over like that, that it has a queen bee gestating in there. So they do these downwards larger cells because the queen isn't going to fit in these worker-sized cells here.
So Seeds, just on that capped queen, so does it mean the fact that that cell is still capped, but does that mean there is a queen already in that hive, and what will happen to that queen in that little capped cell?
So yes, it's a bit brutal, but what happens is there's already a queen that's emerged from one of those queen cells. She's taken off, she's done her mating flight, she's now a successful laying queen in the hive, which means that that queen is going to be destroyed. So if we don't transfer it to another hive that needs one, what will happen is if the queen was a virgin, she'd make a tooting or piping noise in the hive. The queen would call back from inside the cell. The virgin queen would come and sting it through the queen cell and actually kill her before she emerges to make sure that she is the reigning egg layer in the hive. Now, once the queen has been on the mating flight, she no longer plays that game, but when she emerges, then there'll be a fight and the strongest queen will win. And that'll usually be the queen that's already grown up in laying eggs. But if she's old and needs to be superseded, then that queen that we saw in the cell might win that fight. So that's how they keep a strong virile population.
Wow, great. Now Cedar, just on the capping of the flow frames before, Lily wants to know, if they're capping the honey and you're harvesting it, does that mean that then it's empty, and do they just recap it all again?
Now that was a real win, you know. With a decade of development, we went through all sorts of crazy designs. I thought, you know, coming from a conventional beekeeping background, that we would have to decap the cells inside the hive in order to get the honey out. And I had all these contraptions, sometimes they're like a capping section that would move away. I had like diaphragms made out of old car tires and things that would pull moving parts with suction and things like that. But in the end, realised that the bees were clever enough to know when the honey's drained out from beneath their feet. Perhaps it sounds different when they walk on it, when it's full and when it's empty, but however they do it, they can tell that the honey's drained out from beneath their feet, and they get to work chewing away, uncapping and rebuilding those cells. So that was a real win, and you'll notice, and you can watch it through the side window, once you've harvested, the bees will start tearing off that capping. If they don't need the space, sometimes they'll leave it a while before they do that. If they do need the space, they'll get in there quite quickly, strip all the capping off, rebuild the cells and start filling with nectar. So it's great to watch that recycling process and watch that happening before your eyes through the side window.
Great. Now, a few people talking about splitting their hives seeds, and as spring is coming on, and Cody's wondering, he's planning on expanding his apiary and wants to split it. So just wondering, if I split the hive and I find the queen, do I need to make sure she stays in the parent hive or move her to the split hive?
Okay, great question. It depends whether you're buying in a queen. If you're buying in a queen, you'll need to know which box your original queen's in so that you can put the new queen in the one that doesn't have a queen. If you're not worried about that and you're allowing the hive to raise their own queen, you can do what's called a walk-away split, where you're taking roughly half of these frames out, putting them in another box, and whichever one doesn't have a queen, we'll raise another one, provided you've put some frames in there that have bee eggs down the cells. So that way you can do a split without even needing to find the queen. However, if I can, I like to leave the queen with the parent colony. Keep that nice and strong and nurture your smaller little split into raising their own queen. And that way I get good honey produce from the parent colony at the same time as taking a split and starting another hive. But it's up to you as a beekeeper to make those decisions on what you're trying to achieve.
How do you deal with foreign pests?
Okay, foreign pests, we have a few of those. We have the small hive beetle, which we can trap using the tray down below, and that works very well. However, you can put other traps in the hive too if you're getting overwhelmed by hive beetle. Super important at the moment in Australia, where the hive beetles are really booming from all of the dying out hives because of varroa. So they're an annoying pest, and the only other one really we have here in Australia that's any meaningful pest is varroa, that has come more recently in the last couple of years, and it's slowly spreading out. Now, varroa management is quite a big topic, and there's many different approaches. There's chemical, there's mechanical, there's organic chemicals, there's inorganic ones, there's all sorts of ways to manage varroa. So to help you make decisions on that, have a look at our website. We've got a decision tree which will help you deciding on what is available for you to manage those annoying little mites that have come more recently. When it first comes to the area, it's a big deal, and after that it settles down. So we're just over the build-up phase, it feels like here, where now we're checking the hives and the mite numbers are staying fairly low. Whereas in the beginning, when, a year ago, when Varroa, over this last year when it first came and built up, then the mite levels were really skying out all the time because bees were heading off collecting honey from dying out colonies and bringing all the mites back, and it's called mite bombs. So here in Australia, we're in an interesting time and the bees need a bit more care than they used to, but the good news is there's a world of knowledge out there from people that have been managing Varroa in every other continent for 30 years or so. So all we need to do is skill up, manage those annoying mites, get over the hump of the build-up phase, and then we join the rest of the world where they typically manage Varroa a couple of times a year in their hive. If they're in Europe, for instance, that's a common thing we hear. Now, as to how you do it, there's lots of different methods. The Flow Hive does open up options to make it easier, and we hear that people are having great success with putting the formic acid pads in the tray below, which means you don't even have to open the hive in order to put your treatment in. And there's also people experimenting with just less time with those pads. But out again, super easy to do and very effective. One thing with that though, there's a caveat, sometimes you lose the queen using the organic acid, formic acid, which we can buy in Australia in the form of Formic Pro. But that is a very easy way to radically reduce the mites in your hive. There's all sorts of other weird and wonderful ways to do it as well. Have a look at our website at honeyflow.com. And if you're in Australia, it's a .com.au, where we have a wealth of information and a decision tree to help you decide how to manage the Varroa. But they're the two pests we get here. In other countries, they have the yellow jackets, which are a wasp, which can come in the entrance and decimate colonies. So entrance reducers are a good idea. Just drawing their nests locally is a good idea. So it depends where you are in the world as well. But it's a fantastic thing to be a beekeeper and be a part of this really important tradition to keep the keystone species, which is intertwined with our whole food system, going. So being a beekeeper plays a big and important part in the world, and it's something we can all do even if we don't have the space, just by this amount of room on your balcony, on your rooftop, in your backyard or out on your farm.
Anna's got a good question. Obviously everyone loving these about the queen seeds and the capped queen. Anna's wondering if you put that capped queen into an empty brood box with the bees that were on that frame when you pulled it out, would the bees leave that frame and head back to the original hive, or is that why you would move it like 7 kilometres away or something?
Okay, so you're talking about getting this frame and perhaps a few others and a bunch of bees and putting it in a little box and using that to take a split. Great choice, because it's already got a queen cell, so it's already got a head start. They don't need to start from an egg. This queen is about to emerge. So if you see that, it's a great frame to put in a split. Now, as to the flight path of the bees, they really geolocate to the spot. It's actually incredible how accurate they are. They know which hive to return to. So when you take the bees away, all the foraging bees that you take will probably come back to this location, or most of them will. The nurse bees, however, may not have orientated to this particular spot. So taking the nurse bees out with the frames here, a whole bunch of them will turn into foragers and be located to that new location. My favourite thing to do when I take a split is actually to use the flight path to send the bees to which hive you want. So let's say we were taking a split from this hive here, I'd actually bump this hive over a little bit, so move it over and put the weaker colony in the lion's share of the flight path. So the weaker colony would go about here and this hive would move over a little bit. And that way you've got a lot of returning foragers boosting the population in the hive that has less bees. And that will really help that hive. Now, it's not to say that you can't take a split and move it somewhere else in your yard. A lot of people do that too, and that can work, but just be mindful to send a lot of bees with it. Make sure there's a lot of brood that's capped and ready to emerge, because if there's not enough bees, then the colony might not make it. So 2 different strategies there to make sure your new little split has enough bees. Okay, we're going to start putting this hive back together as you think of your questions. Also, a big shout out to those that are helping answer questions. It's fantastic to have you there sharing knowledge, and it's just mind-blowing for me to have this global community sharing knowledge, sharing stories, and helping each other in this amazing and really key pursuit of beekeeping.
Great. So it's with the honey that you're harvesting from the hive up in the boat, just wondering we haven't got a flow frame, but does it squeeze the cappings together, or do the blades go up and down, and that's why the honey ends up down in that bottom little trough?
Okay, so the invention is you've got cells like this, and Sophie's just run inside to get a frame to show you just how it works. But basically they move vertically. I had a lot of designs in the beginning going this direction, right? So sideways, which I had sort of structures like this that came apart, and then it wasn't comb anymore and the honey could flow, and then they came back together. And while that was working, my dad one day after a couple of strong coffees was like, oh, how about instead of going that way, we go this way? And straight away I dropped everything I'd been doing for years, and we rushed into the shed and started building a prototype that had the vertical method, where if a cell's like that, it goes like that, and the honey then drains down that pathway. So if I get the frame here, I can show you just how that works. So this is our flow frame invention, and really quite different to the frames in the bottom. The cells are deeper because we ideally don't want the queen laying in the cells. We still use a queen excluder anyway, but the cells are deeper because they like to have deeper cells when they're only storing honey and they're not using it for brood. So if you have a look at this frame, now tell me if you can see roughly hexagon shapes. It's a bit hard to see because of the gaps. Now if I put this key in just halfway, about to where my fingers are, and I turn that, you'll notice that these cells on this side are turning into zigzagging pathways. And that's the invention. If this was full of honey, the bees had waxed, covered all the parts in wax and built their comb out, the honey would be flowing down this section, and this section it wouldn't. If I wanted to harvest more, I could simply turn the key, put it all the way in, and open the entire frame. And that makes it quite versatile. You can harvest part of a frame or all of a frame or multiple frames when you want to harvest some honey. Now if I then come along and put the key in the top slot, like that, and turn it, all of those cells turn back into hexagons. The bees will then rip off the wax capping, coat all the parts in wax, rebuild the cells, and start depositing nectar again. So it works very nicely. Let's put this back together and go and have a look at our honey harvest. Okay, so to put this back in, we actually want to try and remember the order it went in. The reason being is you don't want to squash comb against comb if there's bulgy bits here and bulgy bits there, because that'll be an area the bees can't service. The hive beetles might lay in that area, and then we've got a problem. So try and always make sure there's at least a bee width of 4.5 millimeters between comb surfaces. Okay. We get our smoky going, we can use that to smoke bees out of the way, and then what we're going to do is move this frame went here. If you can't remember, just focus on how the frames are meeting. This one here went right back in this location, doesn't have any bulgy bits anyway, so we're just looking out for that comb. Sometimes when they're storing a lot of honey, they'll really build out the cells. And squashing the frames up close together because bee space is important. Smoking bees out of the way as you close the gap between the end bars. And you can use your hive tool, lay down like this on this angle just to close the gap, like that, because this last frame went right over here on this edge. I'm taking a note, I know where that queen cell is. If we're going through the apiary later, we'll know that we have a queen cell here we can come and get. Beautiful. So that's now going back in. And the very last step is just to squish all the frames together, making sure any excess space is on either side. You don't want gaps in the middle, or what can happen is the bees will start building comb between the frames, which is just hard to then service the frame. So we're wanting to keep it serviceable by squashing all the frames together, keeping the bee space how the bees like it, and then they're unlikely to build comb between frames. Our little frame rests come off, and then I can show you how to close up the hive the easy way with our super lifter. So we're always innovating to make beekeeping easy, rewarding and fun. Alright, there we go. So this super lifter, my dad and I spent about 7 years with various different prototypes, knowing that one of the pain points for beekeepers was lifting the heavy boxes. And look at that, I can just easily close it in a really controlled way, making sure I'm lining that up. And then to close it up, you've got this level of control that people are really loving. We get rave reviews and amazing touching reviews of how this is changing people's lives. I can't see any bees there. I'm just slowly landing that top box, which is completely different to the conventional way of bottling up with a big heavy box and having to drop it on a pile of bees like it used to be. So we can be more gentle and it's easier. And that's it, back in the bag. Let's go and have a look at our honey harvest. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions as we pack up our little honey harvest over here. And also let us know what you might like us to cover next week. Always interested in what's on your mind, so we can help out and get your questions answered. Look at that, amazing, beautiful amount of honey there. Perfect jars of honey, thanks to the bees and their incredible work producing this amazing amount of honey. This is 2 frames out of 7, and look at that, 3 kilograms per jar. No more processing needed, ready for the table. It's just a beautiful thing, and such an amazing thing to share the honey.
Seed's just wondering if you'd mind, just wanting, Harith's wondering if this is a real live, so I thought I'd just ask that. And they're wondering how many bees are in a flow hive, how many bees in a box?
Okay, so in a booming colony you can have upwards of 50,000 bees, and most of them are the worker bees who spend the last half of their life heading out, collecting nectar, collecting pollen, bring it back to the hive. You've also got a handful of drones, maybe 600 drones, they're the male bees, and usually just 1 queen. So that's the makeup of a hive. This hive here, at a guess, I would say there's 25 or 30,000 bees in it right now, which is extraordinary. And what's even more extraordinary is the number of flowers they can visit. So a hive like this could easily visit 50 million flowers in a day. And that is just incredible. And one of the reasons why humans take them around the world, wherever they travel, because of their important pollination services in agriculture and the amazing amount of honey that they produce. Look at this. It is just beautiful. Nice. Perfect jar of honey. Now, we can close that up, and I'm not going to leave it up there in case it falls off, tempting as it was. Now, a little tip here, when you're finishing off the harvest, the key goes in the top slot and you're pushing all of those moving parts down like that. Easy to turn the key there, but leave it there for a minute or so to push all of those parts in their correct position so the bees can then do their job of rebuilding the comb, and the whole process starts again. If you do a little quick close and move on, perhaps some of the parts didn't properly move down because they're pressing against that wax and propolis, and you get wobbly shaped cells, blobs of wax that to make these wobbly cells usable, and that restricts the flow path later. So really good idea to leave that key in there while you pack up your jar of honey for a minute or two, and that way you've got all of the cell parts in alignment. Thanks for watching. Same time next week, and let's have a look at these jars of honey. Very nice. See you again, same time next week.